Good evening. What a shame that you found yourself here at the Monster of the Week. Oh, bad intros aside, we're trying something new. Hi, welcome, Monster of the Week, new show. The idea being that I figured you guys don't like hearing about my personal life as much, so Unwashed Asses is going to kind of do its own thing, but I wanted to do something with a bit more focus, something tangible, something that you know you can expect, which you get with other podcasts, where they have a theme and they have a reason for you to listen instead of it essentially being the audio diary of a guy in his mid-30s. So, in my searches across all podcastdom for things I'd like to listen to, I was looking for something more supernatural that wasn't a wholehearted fabrication like, what's the name of it? I can't even remember. But essentially, they're all long-form, old-timey radio-style podcasts where they're telling a story with voice actors and sound work and all that, instead of being a more historical look at creatures of mythology and horror and just monsters in general. So I have now taken it upon myself to do just that, where once a week we're going to dig up some creepy, ghouly, bump of the night monster that either you know quite a lot about, like vampires or zombies, or things that are a little lesser known, like the Jersey Devil, or in this case of our inaugural, would it be inaugural? I don't know. Our first episode. We're going to learn about the Squonk. And the Squonk comes to us from Reddit user A Mob of Ducks. They posted it in the Today I Learned subreddit. And I don't know that I want to say I'm super well versed in mythological creatures, because I can't even pronounce the word itself, but I am competent. I know my way around about the spooky monstery side of things, and Squonk was one that I had never ever heard of. So I guess without further ado, let's get into it. The Squonk itself comes from a book called Fearsome Creatures of the Lumber Woods with a Few Desert and Mountain Beasts, written by William T. Cox. It was published in 1910. This was a book that covered a lot of, I guess, mythological creatures out and about the world, but what was interesting is that it presented itself kind of like a field guide, rather than just saying, giving you stories of each creature. Sometimes stories were included with the descriptions. It was instead like, you're going hiking and you're looking at specific berries, or you want to know what kind of bird it is. You would have this field guide of creatures. Each creature has its own description, has sketches, and then again, sometimes would have a little anecdote or a story about someone who had encountered the creature itself. This lovely book itself, though, is available over at lib.lumberwoods.com. It's a fully interactive web version of the book that, upon doing the research here for the Squonk, I'm like, oh, I need this book. So if you like this kind of stuff, then definitely check it out. We'll have it in the show notes. But its description of the Squonk is, the range of the Squonk is very limited. Few people outside of Pennsylvania have ever heard of the quaint beast, which is said to be fairly common in the hemlock forests of that state. The Squonk is of a very retiring disposition, generally traveling about at twilight and dusk. Because of its misfitting skin, which is covered with warts and moles, it is always unhappy. In fact, it is said, by people who are best able to judge, to be the most morbid of beasts. Hunters who are good at tracking are able to follow a Squonk by its tear-stained trail, for the animal weeps constantly. When cornered, and escape seems impossible, or when surprised and frightened, it may even dissolve itself in tears. Squonk hunters are most successful on frosty moonlit nights, when tears are shed slowly and the animal dislikes moving about. It may then be heard weeping under the boughs of dark hemlock trees. Mr. J.P. Wentling, formerly of Pennsylvania, but now at St. Anthony Park, Minnesota, had a disappointing experience with a squonk near Mont Alto. He made a clever capture by mimicking the squonk and inducing it to hop into a stack in which he was carrying it home, when suddenly the burden lightened and the weeping ceased. Wentling unslung the sack and looked in. There was nothing but tears and bubbles. And this is the first and honestly only real description that we have of the squonk. And, digging around a little bit, there are references to the creature in popular culture, but there aren't really any other stories about it or any historical references like, how we constantly have stories about people seeing Bigfoot or Loch Ness or aliens and so on and so forth. The squonk is an obscure and, again, relatively unknown creature. So, with that being said, when we take a look at the other sources of the squonk, they all seem to line up that it is, it resembles kind of a medium-sized dog in terms of size, but built more like a pig in that its overall body shape, it's kind of like a big oval with tiny legs sticking out the bottom, a smashed in face that's constantly weeping, very loose fitting skin like a bloodhound or what are those wrinkly dogs? We're gonna do a Google search here. I didn't think of this. Wrinkly dogs. Images. What are you? No, don't give me dogs with wrinkly faces. This is a terrible first show, and I apologize. The Shar-Pei. There we go. So yeah, imagine an ugly Shar-Pei with no fur, just skin, and all kinds of warts all over its body. And it's just constantly crying. What's interesting, though, is that it has that ability to dissolve itself into a pool of tears. What we don't know is that whether or not it can reconstruct itself from said tears, or if our gentleman J.P. Wentling had ever tried or did anything with the sack after the fact. And taking a look at other sources for the squonk itself, we find that there is another use for the word. It is the act of squeezing e-liquid from the reservoir of a bottom-fed e-cig mod up into the atomizer. And the quote here is, forgetting to squonk can lead to dry hits and a burnt wick. Which I know nothing about here. The only other thing really that can be said of the squonk itself before we start getting into popular culture here, Reddit user in the same subreddit thread there, Unnatural Lorder was saying that legend has it that those tears of the squonk were mixed with the DNA of a Boston Terrier, and that's how pugs came about. Beyond that, the more popular references for it would be the prog rock band Genesis actually released on the album Trick of the Tail a song called Squonk. And the lyrics itself kind of go in to a general, I don't know if it'd be like a first-person narrative of the life of a squonk, but it plays well enough. I'm not really into prog rock itself, but it's got a good beat to it. I like the bass line, and if you go and read the lyrics themselves, it seems to make sense with this creature. Beyond that, we have Mario Bava's 1971 film, Twitch of the Death Nerve. It features dialogue about describing a squonk. Steely Dan makes a reference to it in the song Any Major Dude Will Tell You. And then just kind of sprinkled throughout through other little bits and pieces there. If you're interested, you can go take a look at the Wikipedia, but nothing really of note because we don't really get anything else on the creature beyond what we've said here. The scientific name of the squonk is Lacrimacorpus dissolvens. It comes from the Latin words meaning tear or tear, I'm not sure here, body and dissolve, which I guess makes sense for this guy. So that's going to wrap this one up. We just don't have any more on the squonk, and that's kind of how episodes themselves are going to go. I don't have a set length in mind. We'll just kind of cover things as best that I am able to on each creature. But if you have your own creepy, crawly, bump in the night ghoul or ghost or goblin you want to talk about, shoot an email over to theunwashedasses at gmail.com. Again, theunwashedasses at gmail.com. And, just put in the subject line, Monster a Week, and what you want to hear about. But yeah, figure Fridays, once a week, we're gonna spit one of these out, and we're gonna better educate ourselves on the unknown mysteries, and not necessarily cryptids, but because we're gonna get into some classic horror here sooner or later, and to some of those things that make our imaginations wonder and make our skin crawl. Till then, I need an outro for this. Crap.